Hey there, TouchDesigner developers. DiLaura here with the Interactive and Immersive HQ. In this video, we're going to build this super fun and colorful particle system and feedback effect. So we're working with feedback and displacement and a couple of other things to give our particles this really cool kind of smoke trail-like effect that makes it look like they're blasting off into outer space. Before we start on this project, I just wanted to point out that I am working with the 2023.10130 version of TouchDesigner for this effect. And for whatever reason, when running it in the current sort of stable version of the program, the effect didn't quite look the same. So I'm not sure what has changed between these two versions because we're not doing anything that supposedly is using any of these new features, but it is different. So keep that in mind as you are putting this together. So starting off with a blank network, we're going to begin by setting up the particle system generator, and then we'll move into rendering it afterwards. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to be using a sphere SOP as our particle generation geometry. And this one is going to be set so that the radius is pretty small. It's going to be a value of 0.01 for all of the X, Y, and Z values there. And then the other thing that I want to make sure that we do is set the number of rows and columns to 200 and 200 so that we have a number of additional points. And although the scale of this is so small that we can't even see it in the preview, it is there, rest assured. So now that we've got that set up, another useful thing to do when working with particles is to change the sorting of the points so that they don't sort of follow the order that they are generated in and are a little bit more randomly placed. And so we'll use the sort SOP for this and set the point sort to random. That's it for our particle source. And so we're going to connect that directly to a particle SOP and place that into the network. In the particle SOP, we have a couple of things that we want to do. Mainly, actually, the particle life expectancy. So we're going to set that to a value of 15 so they can exist for a little bit longer. And then we're actually going to use a metaball and a force to add even further sort of push outwards from this center position where they're spawning. So I'm going to start with the metaball. And this is going to be set up so that the radius is quite a bit larger. I'm going to set the radius here to a value of 11 by 11 by 11, and we'll leave everything else at the default. Then I'm going to hook this up to a force, and we want a radial force in this case. Now, if we connect this directly to the third input here, which is the force input, it's actually going to be bringing the particles back towards the center because the radial force is pointing in that direction. However, if we set this radial force to -1, it will have the effect of then pushing the particles outwards instead. So we've got that set up. And now we're going to use this information. This is going to be the point positions for our rendering pipeline, our instancing setup. So I'm going to add a null to the end here, and we'll call this one POS. And then what I'm going to do is actually take this information, and I'm also going to convert it into chop channels because I want to use some of the information from this particle system, some of the data, to provide us with a color value and an alpha value. So I'm going to right-click on the output of the null POS operator, I'll come to the chop page, I'll grab a SOP2 chop. We've then converted that into the chop channels, but we actually need to make some changes here as well. We don't actually need the positions because those are going to be provided by this SOP. So I'm going to turn that switch off, but we're going to need some custom attributes. So I'll turn on this custom switch, and then we can provide some custom attribute names in the attribute scope. So the ones that I'm looking for this example are the ones relating to velocity and life. So if I type in V0, V1, and V2 and hit enter, I now have the velocity vector in the X, Y, and Z direction. Then if I type in life, open and close parentheses, and 0, that is giving me the current sort of position in their life expectancy that each particle is at. So this is like the sort of a timer or a count until they reach the maximum, which is the value we set in the particle SOP of 15, and then they die and are reset. So I'm going to split these things out into separate chop branches so that I can work with math chops on them independently. So I'll start off with a select chop, and this one will be for V0 through 2. So I'm just going to use pattern matching here, V, and then some brackets, 0-2, and that has given me those 3 channels. Then what I'll do is add a math chop. And before we make some changes here, I'm just going to copy and paste this because we need a second branch with the same operators. In this second select, I'm going to change the channel name, delete V0-2, and then grab the life 0 parameter. In this first math chop, we're just going to come to the range page and set the from range to fall between -1 and +1. This will have the effect of bringing our color within the 0 to 1 range. Mostly we'll have a little bit of values above and below that, but I found that for our final effect, this actually looks pretty nice for the color values. For the life, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to, however, tie the range maximum to the life expectancy value that we set up here in the particle SOP. So what I'll do is to click on the particle SOP, click and drag from the life expectancy parameter and bring that to the math chop. And then I will keep dragging and let go on the from range maximum and hit reference. So now that has set the maximum here to a value of 15. Now what I'm going to do with the to range is to change that up a little bit as well. This is going to be used for the alpha. And what I found is that by setting it to, first of all, 1 to 0, that will give us a non-transparent particle when it is born. And then as it is going through its life expectancy, it will fade out to fully transparent. So I want, first of all, to set the to range max or minimum, or the first value here, to 1. And then normally I would set the second value here to 0, but I found that by setting it to -1, I ended up getting a little bit of a better fade out. With this at 0, there would be a longer sort of period where the particles were in this sort of gray area zone, but feel free to experiment with that in your own project as well. Then I'm going to merge these channels back into a single chop with a merge chop, so we can access those in our instancing setup. I'll then add a null, and we'll call this null space IN. Oh wait, this is for our color, so null space color is what we want to call this. Okay, great. So next up, we're going to set up our rendering pipeline, and then we'll get into feedback. So I'm going to start off with an add SOP. This will be used to add a single point. I'll just turn this add points switch on. And then I'm going to right click on the output here and add in a convert SOP. We'll use this to take that point and convert it into a particle. So we're going to convert to particles per point. We also want to set the particle type here to render as point sprites. Then I can hook this directly up to a geocomp so that we can do our rendering. And in the geocomp, here's where I'm going to specify all of my different instancing data that I've set up. So I'm going to come to the instance 1 page first, and I'll turn on this instancing switch. And then going to grab the null POS and drag that into the translate op, and then grab P0, P1, and P2 for the translate parameters, which will give us the positioning that we want for our particle system rendering. And then the other thing that I want to do is to come to the instance 2 page and add in our color null. So I'm going to drag this onto the color op. I'm going to then grab V0, V1, V2 for the RGB values. And then for the alpha, I want life 0. If I then look in my viewer here, well, I can't really see a whole lot. So that means likely we need to get rendering and position our camera so that we can see what is going on. And that also includes, of course, adding a material so that we can see this as well. So I'll start with the material. I'm going to add a line mat, and then I'll click and drag that onto the geo and set this to the parameter material. I'll come back to the line mat where I'm going to set the, first of all, the draw lines I'm going to turn off, and then I'll come to the point page and turn draw points on. I don't really care about having a point far color, so I'm going to turn that off. And then I am going to set this point near color to fully white. Finally, I'm going to come to the common page and turn on blending transparency because we do want to have some opacity. Once I've done that, I can see now in my geo that we have some color being applied to those points. And that's perfect because that's what I want. Next up, I'm going to add a camera. And this, I'm just going to use just some slight adjustment here to adjust the position. I'm going to set this to a translate of 10 on the z-axis, which is just pulling it away from the center point a little bit. And then I can go straight to my render top, in which I should start seeing those particles being spawned. So that's great. Now I'm going to be using this with feedback, and I'm going to be using this with displacement. So I want to increase the bit depth in the pixel format setting. I'm going to use 16-bit float in this case. Okay, so next up, we're going to add in our feedback top so we can generate our effect. So let's begin actually in this portion by setting up the feedback network and getting it running, and then we'll sort of add in the components from there. So I'm going to start off with a null, which I'll place way over to the right. I'm going to add a composite after that. And then I want to connect this null 1 coming from the render to the composite as well. I'll set the composite to the over operation. And then I'm going to click and drag the composite onto the feedback top so that it has then set the target top and started the feedback loop. So we can see already that we're generating feedback. We're getting this cool kind of trail effect. And now it's time to start working with some additional operators in order to turn this into our final outcome. So what we'll do to begin is to add in the displace top, which is sort of the core of this smoky traily effect. And the displace top is going to need a displace image for the second input to tell the effect how to sort of move the pixels around on the screen. And before we add that in, I'm going to make some quick changes here so that we have a less dramatic sort of effect added in once we do put the displace top in place. So what I'll do here is to set the displace weight to 0.005 for both the horizontal and vertical. And then I'm going to set the extend mode here to mirror. Now I'm going to use a slope top to take the slope of the feedback texture and give us a sort of vector, the direction of movement from each one of these particles. So we'll add the slope top in, and within the slope top, we're going to set the strength value here to 14. And now again, that's going to essentially give us the ability to generate those smoke trails in the kind of direction of movement of each one of those particles. I'm going to then add a blur top after this. And the blur top is going to be used to kind of smooth out the trails of smoke that we're generating. It's just going to simply kind of take that texture and take off some of the hard edges from it. I'm going to set the pre-shrink here to a value of 2. And I'm going to set my sample step to 0.5. Then I can simply connect that to the displace, and immediately we've got some interesting kind of stuff going on. But as we probably have noticed, it sort of fills up the screen and doesn't allow for a whole lot to happen after that point. So we can use a level top now to attenuate the signal a little bit and allow for new sorts of movement and things to occur. So I'm going to come to the post page in this level top and set the opacity to 0.98. Now, as soon as we do that, you can see we're getting something that looks a lot closer to what we had at the beginning. We do have, certain areas that are not appearing to do as much, but that's okay. We're going to add some additional effects now to kind of take care of that. The first thing that we can do to kind of give ourselves a more even distribution of movement, you can see most of the trailing really is occurring in this upper right, half of the screen or quadrant. We can actually add in an HSV Adjust on this connection between the null one and the comp. So I can insert the HSV Adjust here, and you can see already that has had the effect of shifting things around because it is, I believe, doing some clamping to the color values and forcing them to be within the 0 to 1 range. Then we can take that further and use the hue offset to kind of shift the orientation of the colors in this output. So if I set that to something like 90, we should see then that our color gets moved around a little bit more from those initial positions and gives us something, again, a little bit more interesting. Feel free to play around here with the hue, saturation, and value parameters as well, because those can definitely have an impact. Another thing that we can do to sort of shift the color, but in the kind of feedback way where it will shift over time, is to add an HSV Adjust between the feedback top and the displace top. So I'm going to add that in, and then in this HSV Adjust here, I'm going to set the hue offset simply to a value of 1. Now, once I've done that, if I right-click in View, we have something that looks pretty much identical to what we had at the beginning. Maybe a little bit different just due to, this sort of running over a period of time. But that is essentially how you can put this effect together. So let's have a brief look at how the different components that I mentioned in the network can impact this. So first of all, I'm going to take the size of this down a little bit. The blur top here, if we deactivate or bypass this, you can see really does impact the way that smoke generation looks. So it's a little bit more flat in this sort of default unmodified state, although it is sort of an interesting effect in itself because we can actually see the particles a little bit more in certain areas. And if we take the blur top and reduce something like the pre-shrink or even increase it, we can change, again, what that smoke starts to look like. When we reduce it, it also can help to increase the sample step back to the default and play around with those settings even more, just to see the sorts of variety that we can get. Obviously, we can continue by animating some of these parameters and or adding in something like noise to recolor the kind of output that we're generating here. There's, of course, a lot that can be done with the feedback system itself. You could also come back here to this portion of the network and play with a number of different SOPs that provide the particle source. But the main idea here is that we're essentially taking the slope of the movement of these particles, which have had their color applied to them based on their velocity. So we take the slope of those color values and the movement of those point positions, and we use that to apply displacement within feedback, which gives us these trailing effects that sort of follow the movement of the particles. So with that, we're going to close this one out. Hope this has been an interesting and fun one for you to put together. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the interactive and immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and Creative Tech Pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and Immersive content.